Marcus clears his throat, and they spring apart like guilty teenagers. The foreman and his intern, caught kissing on the construction site after hours. Elijah's career flashes before his eyes, everything he's built, destroyed in one careless moment. Marcus looks between them, expression unreadable. "How long?" he finally asks. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The summer heat hit him like a wall, even at 7:30 in the morning. New York in July was brutal, but somehow the construction site amplified it. Heat radiating off metal scaffolding and half-finished concrete, the smell of tar and sawdust already thick in the air. Owen had dressed in what he thought was appropriate work clothes, khaki pants and a button-down shirt he'd ironed last night. But looking at the crews already moving around the site in worn jeans and work boots and tank tops that showed off muscular arms built from actual labor rather than gym memberships, he felt ridiculous, overdressed, out of place. Exactly like the privileged college kid doing a summer internship that everyone would resent. He was scanning the controlled chaos, trying to figure out where he was supposed to report. When he saw him, the man was impossible to miss, standing head and shoulders above everyone else near the construction trailer, at least 6'7", with shoulders so broad they strained against his dark gray work shirt. His skin was a rich, deep brown that seemed to absorb the early morning sunlight, and even from 50 feet away, Owen could see the way other workers deferred to him. The natural authority in how he stood, how he gestured while talking to two guys with clipboards. The foreman, Owen realized, had to be. And Owen was supposed to report to the foreman for his first day orientation. His feet wouldn't move, because the foreman had just turned, scanning the site with sharp, assessing eyes. And when that gaze landed on Owen, standing frozen at the gate like an idiot, everything in Owen's carefully ordered world tilted sideways. The man was beautiful, not handsome in the safe, conventional way of the boys Owen had gone to school with. Beautiful in a way that made Owen's mouth go dry and his heart hammer against his ribs and heat flood through his body in a way he'd spent 23 years successfully avoiding. Strong features, a jaw that looked carved from stone, lips that were full and expressive even from this distance. And those eyes, dark and intense, and currently fixed on Owen with an expression Owen couldn't read, but that made his skin feel too tight. The foreman said something to the men he'd been talking to, then started walking toward Owen with a purposeful stride that ate up the distance between them in seconds. Owen's brain provided absolutely no helpful thoughts, just a loop of "oh God, oh God, oh God," while his body responded to the approaching man in ways that were entirely inappropriate for a work site, for any site, for someone who was supposed to be his supervisor. Elijah Cross had been running construction crews for 12 years, and he'd developed a sixth sense for trouble. So when he spotted the kid standing at the gate looking like a deer in headlights, expensive bag clutched in white-knuckled hands and a hard hat so new it still had the manufacturer's sticker on it, every instinct Elijah had honed on job sites from Brooklyn to the Bronx told him this summer was about to get complicated. The company had told him they were sending an intern, some architecture student from Columbia doing a practicum requirement, needing hands-on experience before graduation. Elijah had agreed because he always agreed when corporate asked, because saying no meant someone else got the good projects. And Elijah hadn't built his reputation by being difficult, but he'd assumed they'd send him someone with at least a little practical knowledge, someone who wouldn't need constant supervision. On a site where one moment of inattention could mean serious injury or worse. This kid didn't look like he'd ever held a hammer in his life. But as Elijah got closer, he had to revise that assessment. Because sure, the kid was clearly out of his element, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, the way he forced himself to stand straight despite obvious nerves, that suggested backbone underneath the polish. He was shorter than Elijah by a good 8 inches, which put him around 5'11", with a lean build that spoke of running or swimming rather than heavy lifting. His hair was sandy brown, cut neat and professional, And his face had that soft quality of someone who'd never had to fight for anything. Cheekbones and jaw that would photograph well in the yearbook but hadn't been tested by real life yet. Pretty, Elijah thought, then immediately shoved that thought down into the locked box where he kept every inappropriate reaction he'd ever had on a job site. Pretty wasn't professional. Pretty wasn't relevant. Pretty was absolutely not something he could afford to notice about the intern he'd be supervising for the next 10 weeks. But then he got close enough to see the kid's eyes, pale blue-gray like early morning sky, wide with nerves and something else Elijah recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror often enough. Want. The kid was looking at him like he'd never seen another man before, pupils dilating despite the bright sunlight, lips parted just slightly, a flush creeping up his neck that had nothing to do with the heat. Oh, Elijah thought, that's going to be a problem. He stopped a few feet away and held out his hand, keeping his expression neutral and professional even though he could feel the kid's eyes on him like a physical touch. You must be the intern from Columbia. I'm Elijah Cross, site foreman. Welcome to the Riverside Renovation Project. The kid stared at his hand for a beat too long before seeming to remember how handshakes worked. When their palms met, Elijah felt the contact like electricity. The kid's hand smaller and softer than his own, but with a firm grip that surprised him. Owen Matthews, the kid said, his voice slightly rough, like he'd forgotten how to use it. I'm your intern for the summer. Thank you for having me. Elijah released his hand before the contact could stretch into awkward territory and gestured toward the construction trailer. Let's get you set up with safety gear and go over the site rules. You read the packet they sent you about OSHA regulations? Yes, sir, Owen said automatically, then seemed to realize what he'd said and flushed deeper. I mean, yes. I read everything. Sir's fine, Elijah said, fighting down the inappropriate flash of heat that title sent through him. On a construction site, respect matters. Safety matters more. You follow my instructions exactly when I give them. No hesitation, no questions until after you're out of danger. Understood? Understood, Owen repeated, and there was something in how he said it, in how quickly he agreed to follow Elijah's orders, that sent warning bells clanging in Elijah's head. Because the kid wasn't just agreeing. He was submitting, looking up at Elijah with those wide blue eyes like he was waiting for more commands, more direction, more of Elijah's attention. This was definitely going to be a problem. Elijah led Owen to the trailer, hyper-aware of the kid following behind him, of the eyes of his crew tracking their movement across the site. He could already hear the comments that would start the second he was out of earshot. Fresh meat. College boy, probably never worked a real day in his life. The usual hazing that happened when someone new joined a crew, amplified by the fact that Owen so obviously didn't belong here. Elijah's job was to make sure that hazing stayed verbal and didn't cross any lines. His job was to integrate Owen into the crew's workflow without incident and send him back to Columbia in 10 weeks with the practical experience he needed. His job was absolutely not to notice the way Owen's pants fit his lean frame, or how his neck looked vulnerable and exposed above his collar, or the fact that he smelled like expensive soap and something citrusy that cut through the omnipresent scent of sawdust and sweat. Inside the trailer, Elijah pulled out the safety gear he'd requisitioned for the intern. Hard hat you've already got, though we need to get that sticker off before someone gives you hell for it. Here's your safety vest, steel-toed boots in what they said was your size, safety glasses, work gloves, ear protection for when we're running the heavy equipment. Owen took each item like it was precious, examining the boots with an expression that suggested he'd never worn anything that wasn't polished leather. These are my size, he confirmed. How did you know? Your file, Elijah said shortly, not mentioning that he'd read Owen's entire personnel folder twice, memorizing details he had no business memorizing. The company sends me information on everyone working my sites. You're 5'11", 170 pounds, size 10 boot, bachelor's degree in architecture with honors, no prior construction experience. That about cover it? Pretty much, Owen said, then hesitated before adding, I know I'm going to slow you down at first. I'm sorry about that. I'll work hard, I promise. I want to learn." The earnestness in his voice did something to Elijah's chest, made that locked box rattle dangerously. "He's just a kid," Elijah reminded himself. 23 years old, probably never been anywhere tougher than the library, looking at you like you hung the moon because you're the first authority figure who's paying attention to him. Don't read anything into it. Don't make this complicated. "Hard work I can respect," Elijah said, keeping his tone businesslike. "Attitude matters more than experience. You stay humble, listen when the guys teach you something. Don't act like your degree makes you better than men who've been doing this for 20 years, and you'll be fine. Anybody gives you real trouble, you come to me. Otherwise, take the ribbon and prove yourself with your hands." Owen nodded, clutching the safety gear to his chest. "Got it. Be humble, work hard. Don't be an asshole." "Basically," Elijah agreed, and couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his mouth at Owen's blunt summary. "Now get changed. Boots and vest at minimum before you step foot on the active site. You can leave your bag in here. It'll be locked." He turned to give Owen privacy, started reviewing the day's schedule on his clipboard, very deliberately not thinking about the fact that the kid was stripping off his button-down shirt 10 feet behind him, not thinking about smooth, pale skin being revealed, about whether Owen was as lean everywhere as his frame suggested, about what those architects' hands would look like fumbling with unfamiliar work boots. "I'm decent," Owen said after a few minutes, voice slightly strained, and when Elijah turned back around, he had to work very hard to keep his expression neutral. The work clothes transformed Owen in ways Elijah wasn't prepared for. The heavy boots made his stance wider, more solid. The safety vest emphasized his shoulders and narrow waist, and something about seeing him dressed for actual labor, hair already mussing in the heat, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple, made Elijah's carefully maintained control slip just a fraction. "Good," Elijah managed, voice coming out rougher than intended. "Now let me show you around the site before we get you assigned to a crew." The Riverside renovation was a massive project, taking an old warehouse complex and converting it into mixed-use residential and commercial space. Elijah's crew was responsible for the structural work, which meant everything from foundation reinforcement to framing new walls to installing the systems that would keep the building standing for another century. It was exactly the kind of challenging, high-profile project that could make or break careers, and Elijah had handpicked most of his team specifically for this job. As he walked Owen through the site, pointing out safety hazards and explaining what each crew was working on, he watched the kid's face transform from nervousness to genuine fascination. Owen asked smart questions, noticed details, understood the structural implications of choices in ways that showed his education wasn't just theoretical. When they stopped to watch a team installing support beams, Owen's whole body leaned forward, eyes tracking every movement, lips parted in concentration. "This is incredible," Owen breathed, so focused on the work he seemed to forget his self-consciousness. "The way you're distributing the load, using the existing framework to support the new structure. That's brilliant engineering. Credit goes to the architect who designed it," Elijah said. "We're just making their vision reality. But yeah, it's good work, challenging work, the kind that makes you proud when it's done right." Owen turned to look at him then, and the expression on his face made Elijah's breath catch. Pure admiration. Uncomplicated and genuine, like Elijah had just revealed the secrets of the universe instead of basic construction principles. "I want to learn how to do this," Owen said. "Not just understand it on paper, but actually build something with my hands. Make something real. Can you teach me that?" It was the wrong question for Elijah's self-control, because teaching meant proximity, meant hands-on guidance, meant touching this kid who already looked at him like he was something special. Teaching meant weeks of close contact, of correcting grip and stance, of standing close enough to smell that citrus scent and feel Owen's body heat. Teaching meant playing with fire when Elijah already felt the burn. "That's what you're here for," Elijah said, keeping his voice level through sheer force of will. "But, Owen, you need to understand something. Construction sites are dangerous. One mistake, one moment of not paying attention, and someone gets hurt. Could be you, could be someone else. So when I'm teaching you, when anyone on this crew is teaching you, you follow instructions exactly. No improvising, no, I think I know better, no hesitation. Lives depend on everyone doing their job right. Can you handle that? Yes, Owen said immediately, standing a little straighter. I can handle that. I trust you. And there it was again, that easy submission, that willingness to put himself in Elijah's hands without question. Elijah had supervised dozens of workers over the years, trained countless newbies, and none of them had ever looked at him the way Owen was looking at him now. Like Elijah was safety and authority and something worth following. Like Elijah was everything he needed. Don't trust me yet, Elijah said, more sharply than he intended. Earn trust by proving yourself, by showing you can take instruction and work hard and not fold the first time something gets difficult. Trust is earned, not given. Something flickered across Owen's face. Hurt, maybe, or determination. You're right, he said quietly. I'll earn it. The rest of the morning was spent getting Owen oriented, introducing him to the crew leads, assigning him to Shadow Marcus, one of Elijah's most experienced carpenters who had a gift for teaching and the patience to deal with a complete novice. Elijah told himself the relief he felt at passing Owen off to someone else's supervision was purely professional, that it had nothing to do with needing distance from those blue eyes and that eager expression. But when lunch break came and Elijah settled on a stack of lumber to eat the sandwich he'd packed, he found himself tracking Owen's movement across the site without meaning to. The kid had been running all morning, fetching tools and materials for Marcus's crew, and his pristine work clothes were already streaked with sawdust and dirt. He'd taken off his hard hat, hair damp with sweat, and he was drinking water like he'd been wandering the desert. He looked good, Elijah thought. Looked real in a way the polished architecture student hadn't, his careful presentation giving way to actual exhaustion and satisfaction from physical work. When Marcus clapped him on the shoulder and said something that made Owen light up with a genuine smile, Elijah felt an irrational stab of jealousy that he had absolutely no right to feel. How's the college boy working out? Elijah looked up to find his second in command, Jerome, settling beside him with his own lunch. Jerome had been working with Elijah for 8 years, knew him well enough to read moods Elijah tried to hide, which made him both invaluable and occasionally inconvenient. Marcus says he's eager, Elijah said neutrally. Asks good questions, doesn't complain, works hard. Better than I expected, honestly. Jerome followed his gaze to where Owen was now helping carry lumber, struggling slightly with the weight, but refusing to give up. Pretty kid, Jerome observed casually. Real pretty. Elijah's jaw tightened. He's an intern, a student, not a kid, and definitely not pretty. Jerome's eyebrows rose. Didn't say he was either of those things. Just said he was pretty, which he is. Got that whole innocent thing going on like he's never been anywhere near a construction site. Which he probably hasn't. What's your point, Jerome? No point, Jerome said easily. Just making an observation. Though I notice you've been watching him all morning like you're worried someone's gonna steal him. I'm supervising, Elijah said coldly. It's literally my job to watch the crew, especially newbies who might hurt themselves. Sure, Jerome agreed, clearly not believing a word. Supervising, that's what we're calling it. Before Elijah could respond, a commotion near the lumber pile drew both their attention. Owen had clearly misjudged the weight of a beam he was trying to carry, stumbled, and would have gone down hard if one of the other workers hadn't steadied him. The beam hit the ground with a crash that echoed across the site, and Owen stood there red-faced and mortified while the guy who'd caught him laughed and said something Elijah couldn't hear. Elijah was on his feet and moving before conscious thought kicked in, crossing the distance in long strides that had other workers scrambling out of his way. When he reached Owen, the kid was apologizing profusely, trying to lift the beam he'd dropped despite clearly not having the strength to manage it safely. Stop, Elijah commanded, and Owen froze instantly, looking up at him with wide eyes. You hurt? No, Owen said quickly. I'm fine, I just lost my grip and "You're lucky Tony caught you before you went down," Elijah interrupted, nodding at the worker who'd prevented Owen's fall. "Could have been a lot worse." "What happened? I thought I could carry it," Owen admitted, frustration clear in his voice. "Marcus's guys were all handling them fine, and I didn't want to ask for help with something everyone else was doing easily." "Everyone else has been doing this for years," Elijah said, keeping his voice level with effort, because what he wanted to do was shake some sense into this stubborn kid. "You've been here 4 hours. There's no shame in asking for help, but there's a lot of shame in getting yourself or someone else hurt because you were too proud to admit you weren't ready for something." Owen's face went even redder, but he met Elijah's eyes. "You're right. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," Elijah said, then turned to the rest of the crew who'd gathered to watch the show. "Back to work, everyone. Lunch break's over in 5. As the workers dispersed, Elijah turned back to Owen. "2-man lift on anything that weighs more than 50 pounds. That's not a suggestion, that's a rule. And if you're not sure how heavy something is, you ask, pride's worthless if you're laid up with a back injury." "Understood," Owen said quietly, and Elijah could see he was genuinely chastened, not just saying what he thought Elijah wanted to hear. "Good. Now go help Marcus's crew with the framing on Section B. And Owen, ask for help when you need it. Nobody here's gonna think less of you for being smart enough to know your limits." He walked away before he could do something stupid like reach out and brush the sawdust from Owen's hair, like check him over for injuries more thoroughly than professional concern warranted, like pull him aside somewhere private and make absolutely sure he understood how badly Elijah needed him to stay safe. The afternoon was brutal, temperature climbing into the 90s with humidity that made breathing feel like work. Elijah spent most of it doing his actual job, checking progress on various parts of the site, dealing with a delivery that arrived 2 hours late, reviewing tomorrow's schedule with the subcontractor crews. But every so often, his eyes would drift to wherever Owen was working, tracking the kid's movement like he had some kind of internal Owen radar. By 4 o'clock, Owen was visibly wilting. He hadn't complained, hadn't asked for breaks beyond the scheduled ones, but Elijah could see the exhaustion in every line of his body. The way he moved slower, stumbled more. Kid was running on empty and too stubborn or too eager to prove himself to admit it. Elijah found Marcus and pulled him aside. "How's the intern doing?" Marcus grinned. "Kid's got heart, I'll give him that. Been busting his ass all day trying to keep up. Probably overdid it, but he'll learn. Want me to send him home early?" "No," Elijah said. "I'll handle it. You all can knock off at 4:30 since we hit our targets for the day." He waited until Marcus headed back to his crew, then made his way to where Owen was attempting to measure and mark boards for cutting, his hands shaking slightly as he held the tape measure. "Owen," he said, and watched the kid. Straighten immediately, that automatic response to Elijah's voice that was becoming familiar. "Yes, you're done for the day. Go clean up and head home." "But it's not even 4:30 yet," Owen protested. "Everyone else is still working and—" "Everyone else didn't just do their first full day of construction work," Elijah interrupted. "You're exhausted. You're more likely to make mistakes when you're tired, and I'm not having you get hurt because you're too stubborn to admit you're running on fumes." "That's not a request, Owen. That's your supervisor telling you to call it a day." For a moment he thought Owen might argue, saw the rebellion flash in those blue eyes. But then Owen's shoulders sagged, and he nodded. "Okay, you're right. I am tired." "Good," Elijah said, gentling his tone slightly. "You did well today. Better than I expected from someone with no experience. Get some rest, hydrate, and I'll see you tomorrow morning at 7:30. Owen gathered his things from the trailer, changed, back into his street clothes, and Elijah very deliberately did not watch him leave the site. Did not notice the way Owen looked back over his shoulder twice before he disappeared through the gate. Did not think about whether the kid lived close enough to walk or if he was taking the subway, whether he'd go home to an apartment he shared with roommates or if he lived alone, whether there was someone waiting for him who'd ask about his first day and listen while Owen talked about everything he'd learned. did not think about Owen at all once he left, except that was a lie, because Elijah thought about nothing but Owen for the rest of the afternoon, and all through the evening, and into the night when he lay in his own bed, alone in the apartment he'd bought 3 years ago, as proof he'd made something of himself. This was going to be the longest 10 weeks of Elijah's life. The pattern established itself quickly over the next few days. Owen arrived every morning at exactly 7:30, earlier than technically required, already dressed in his work clothes and ready to learn. He threw himself into every task with the same desperate enthusiasm, soaking up instruction like he was afraid he might forget something crucial if he didn't absorb it immediately. The crews warmed to him faster than Elijah expected, won over by his willingness to do the grunt work nobody else wanted, his genuine appreciation when someone taught him a new skill, his complete lack of entitlement, despite the expensive education and obvious privilege he'd come from. But warming to him meant teasing him, and construction crews showed affection through merciless ribbing. By the end of week 1, Owen had been nicknamed College, which was better than some alternatives Elijah had heard over the years. The guys razzed him about his soft hands, his careful pronunciation, the fact that he brought salads for lunch instead of sandwiches. They made jokes about him being too pretty for construction work, about how he'd probably never gotten dirty before in his life. Owen took it all in stride, laughed at himself, gave as good as he got when he could. But Elijah noticed the way certain comments made his jaw tighten, the way his smile got forced when the jokes crossed certain lines. Noticed and filed it away, because understanding what bothered Owen felt important in ways Elijah wasn't ready to examine. What he couldn't ignore was the physical awareness that seemed to intensify every day instead of fading into familiarity. Every time Elijah had to demonstrate something hands-on, showing Owen proper grip or stance or technique, the contact felt electric. Owen's skin was softer than it had any right to be, pale and smooth, where Elijah's was dark and calloused from years of hard labor. And the kid responded to touch like he was starving for it, leaning into Elijah's guidance, his breath catching audibly when Elijah's fingers corrected his hold on a hammer or adjusted his shoulders to the right angle. Worse was the way Owen watched him. Those blue eyes tracked Elijah's movement across the site constantly, like Owen was afraid he might miss something if he looked away. When Elijah gave instructions to the full crew, he could feel Owen's gaze on him, intent and hungry for knowledge, and maybe for something else Elijah absolutely could not acknowledge. When Elijah stripped off his shirt on particularly brutal days, working in just his undershirt because the heat made anything else unbearable, he'd look up and find Owen staring before quickly jerking his eyes away, color flooding his face in a blush that Elijah felt in his gut like a physical touch. The kid wanted him. That much was becoming impossible to ignore. Wanted him with an intensity that made every interaction between them feel charged with possibility, with the terrible temptation of what could happen if Elijah let his own carefully controlled desire off its leash. But wanting wasn't the same as understanding what you wanted. Elijah had been 20 before he'd admitted to himself that women didn't interest him the way men did. 25 before he'd worked up the courage to act on that truth. 30 before he'd stopped feeling like he had to hide it from everyone except the people closest to him. He'd learned through painful experience that assumptions could be dangerous, that reading too much into someone's attention could end badly. So maybe Owen watched him because Elijah was his supervisor and Owen was desperate to learn. Maybe Owen responded to touch because physical guidance was new to him and he was hyper-aware of it as a teaching tool. Maybe the blushes meant embarrassment rather than attraction, self-consciousness about his inexperience rather than desire. Maybe Elijah was projecting his own inappropriate attraction onto a straight kid who just wanted to learn construction. By the middle of week 2, Elijah's control was fraying at the edges. It didn't help that the heat wave showed no signs of breaking. Temperatures hitting the upper 90s every afternoon, making the site feel like working inside an oven. It didn't help that Owen was getting more comfortable, shedding some of his careful polish, showing up with his hair less perfectly styled, forearms already tanning from days in the sun, a confidence in his movement that came from growing familiar with the physical work. It especially didn't help that Owen had started seeking Elijah out during breaks, settling near him like it was the most natural thing in the world, asking questions about Elijah's life outside work in ways that felt personal rather than professional. Where did Elijah grow up? Did he always want to work construction? What did he do for fun when he wasn't on site? Elijah answered carefully, keeping things surface level. But Owen was persistent in the way only someone who genuinely wanted to know could be. And bit by bit, Elijah found himself sharing more than he meant to, talking about growing up in the Bronx, his father's construction business that had folded during the recession, his own determination to build something stable in an unstable world, his love for the work itself, for taking raw materials and creating structures that would outlast him, for being part of something bigger than himself. Owen listened like every word mattered, asked follow-up questions that showed he'd been paying attention, shared his own stories in return. Private school in Connecticut, parents who expected him to go into finance like his father, the quiet rebellion of choosing architecture instead, the constant pressure to prove he'd made the right choice. "We're not that different," Owen said one afternoon, when they were sitting in the shade of the construction trailer, sharing the last of Elijah's water because Owen had run out an hour ago, both trying to build something real, prove we're more than where we came from. "We're plenty different," Elijah said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You came from money and privilege and got to choose your own path. I came from nothing and had to fight for every opportunity." Owen was quiet for a moment, and when Elijah glanced over, he found the kid watching him with an expression that was far too understanding. "Maybe," Owen said softly, "but we're both here, both doing work that matters to us, both trying to be better than we were yesterday. That's what I meant about not being different. The drive, the need to prove ourselves." Before Elijah could respond, Jerome's voice cut across the site calling his name, needing him to deal with a permit issue. He stood, putting distance between himself and Owen's two perceptive eyes, and didn't let himself look back. But that conversation stayed with him through the afternoon and into the evening. The idea that he and Owen might have something fundamental in common despite their surface differences. The way Owen had looked at him, like he saw past the foreman persona to the man underneath, like he understood things about Elijah that Elijah barely admitted to himself. Week 3 brought a shift in the site schedule. They were behind on the interior framing due to supply delays, which meant longer days to catch up. Elijah started scheduling overtime, which most of the regular crew jumped at for the extra pay. Owen, whose internship was technically part-time, wasn't required to stay, but when Elijah mentioned the overtime, the kid immediately volunteered. "I want to help," Owen said. "Besides, it's not like I have anywhere else to be." That last part stuck with Elijah more than it should have. Didn't Owen have friends, a girlfriend or boyfriend waiting for him? A life outside this construction site? The thought of Owen going home alone every night to an empty apartment made something in Elijah's chest ache. The overtime meant working until 7 or 8 most evenings, when the summer sun finally set and the temperature dropped from unbearable to merely oppressive. It meant the site emptying out until it was just Elijah's core crew, a dozen men who'd been with him for years and knew the work so well they could do it in their sleep. And it meant Elijah working shoulder to shoulder with Owen in ways that blurred every professional line he'd been trying to maintain. On Thursday night of week 3, they were working on framing a complicated load-bearing wall, which required precise measurements and perfect 90-degree angles. Most of the crew had knocked off at 7, but Elijah wanted this section done before tomorrow, and Owen had stayed without being asked, holding boards steady while Elijah marked and cut, fetching tools before Elijah had to ask for them, anticipating his needs in ways that only came from paying very close attention. "Hand me the level," Elijah said, and Owen had it in his hand before the words finished leaving his mouth. They were pressed close in the confined space of the unfinished room, the wall they were building boxing them in, and Elijah was hyper-aware of Owen's body heat, his scent cutting through the omnipresent sawdust, the sound of his breathing. "Hold this steady," Elijah instructed, positioning a board, and Owen moved immediately to brace it, his hands on either end, while Elijah checked the alignment. "Perfect. Don't move." He drove the first nail home, the impact reverberating through the board and into Owen's hands. Watched the kid's arms tremble slightly from the effort of holding steady, saw sweat drip down his temple, noticed the way Owen's tongue darted out to wet his lips, and felt that observation hit him like a physical blow. "You good?" Elijah asked, voice coming out rougher than intended. "I'm good," Owen confirmed, meeting his eyes across the length of the board, and the look on his face was anything but good. It was need and want and barely controlled desire, so obvious Elijah didn't know how he'd been fooling himself about Owen's interest. The truth was right there between them, heavy and undeniable. Owen wanted him, not as a mentor or supervisor or teacher, but as a man, wanted him with an intensity that matched Elijah's own carefully suppressed desire. And Elijah was tired of pretending he didn't see it, didn't feel it, didn't want it just as desperately. He drove 3 more nails in quick succession, each impact making Owen's breath hitch, then stepped back to examine their work. It was good, clean lines and solid construction, exactly what it needed to be. But Elijah couldn't focus on the craftsmanship when Owen was standing there looking at him like that, chest heaving from exertion, lips parted, eyes dark with want. "We should call it," Elijah said abruptly. "It's late." "Okay," Owen agreed, but he didn't move, didn't break eye contact, seemed to be waiting for something. The site was quiet around them, everyone else long gone, just the two of them in this half-finished building with the summer night pressing in through the open walls. Dangerous. This whole situation was dangerous, crackling with the potential for Elijah to do something catastrophically stupid. "Owen," he started, not sure what he was going to say, some warning or deflection or outright rejection, but Owen stepped closer instead of backing away, close enough that Elijah could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the faint freckles the sun had brought out across his nose, the rapid pulse beating in his throat. "I know this is inappropriate," Owen said quietly, his voice steady despite the nervousness Elijah could feel radiating off him. "I know you're my supervisor, and this is probably the worst idea I've ever had, and you're going to tell me all the reasons why this can't happen. But I need to know if I'm completely wrong about what I think is happening here, because I'm losing my mind, Elijah." "You're not wrong," Elijah heard himself say, the admission dragged out of him against every better judgment he possessed. "But that doesn't mean acting on it is smart." "I don't care about smart," Owen said, taking another small step closer. "I've been smart my whole life. I've done everything right, followed every rule, never taken a risk I couldn't calculate the outcome of. And where has it gotten me? Alone, untouched, watching life happen to other people while I stay safe and miserable." "Owen," Elijah tried again, but the kid wasn't done. "You make me want to be reckless," Owen continued, his eyes locked on Elijah's with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "You make me want things I've never let myself want before. And maybe that's stupid. Maybe I'm going to regret this tomorrow. But right now all I can think about is what it would feel like if you touched me the way I want you to touch me." The words hung between them, confession and invitation and plea all rolled into one, and Elijah felt his control crack clean through. Every reason this was a terrible idea warred with the overwhelming need to close the distance between them, to show Owen exactly what it felt like to be wanted by someone who'd been holding back for 3 weeks of torture. "This is a bad idea," Elijah said, but his body was already moving closer, drawn by a gravity he couldn't resist. "We shouldn't do this." "I know," Owen whispered, swaying toward him. "Tell me to stop and I will." Instead of answering, Elijah closed the final distance and kissed him. The kiss shattered every careful boundary Elijah had constructed over 3 weeks of torture. Owen's lips were soft and uncertain against his, inexperienced but eager, and when Elijah's hand came up to cup the back of Owen's neck, the kid made a small, desperate sound that went straight to Elijah's core. Elijah had kissed men before, had relationships that ranged from casual to serious, but nothing had ever felt like this. Like touching fire and ice simultaneously, like falling and flying, like every cliché he'd ever rolled his eyes as suddenly making perfect sense. Owen kissed like someone who'd been waiting his whole life for permission to want. Something this badly, who'd finally found it and was determined to make up for lost time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen's eyes were wide and dazed, his lips already slightly swollen. That was, he started, then seemed to lose the ability to form words. "Yeah," Elijah agreed, his voice rough. "That was." They stood there in the dim construction site, surrounded by half-finished walls and the smell of fresh lumber, the summer night pressing in through the open framework. Elijah knew he should step back, re-establish distance, remember all the excellent reasons this was a terrible idea. Instead, he found himself pulling Owen closer, one hand still cradling his neck while the other settled on his waist. "We can't do this here," Elijah said, even as his body contradicted every word by drawing Owen tighter against him. "The site isn't private enough." "Then take me somewhere that is," Owen said, his hands fisting in Elijah's shirt. "Please, Elijah, I need." He stopped, color flooding his face, but his eyes stayed locked on Elijah's. "I need you to touch me. I need to know what this feels like." The raw honesty in Owen's voice, the way he wasn't trying to hide his inexperience or his desperation, made Elijah's last shred of resistance crumble. "My place is 10 minutes from here," he heard himself say. "But Owen, you need to be absolutely sure about this, because once we cross this line completely, everything changes." "I'm sure," Owen said without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything." They gathered their things in tense silence, Elijah locking down the site while Owen waited by his truck, nervous energy radiating off him in waves. The drive to Elijah's apartment was excruciating, 10 minutes that felt like hours, both of them hyper-aware of the other's presence, of what was about to happen. Elijah's apartment was modest but clean, the home of someone who worked too much to care about decorating beyond the basics. Owen barely seemed to notice his surroundings, his attention fixed entirely on Elijah as they moved from the front door to the living room. "Last chance to change your mind," Elijah said, giving Owen every opportunity to back out even as his own body screamed for him to stop offering escapes. Owen answered by stepping close and kissing him again, more confident this time, his hands coming up to frame Elijah's face. When they broke apart, Owen said quietly, "I don't want to change my mind. I want you to show me what I've been missing. Will you do that?" The way he asked, like he was placing something precious in Elijah's hands and trusting him not to break it, made Elijah's chest ache. "Yeah," he said softly, "I can do that. But we go at your pace, Owen. You tell me if anything doesn't feel right, if you need me to slow down or stop. This is about you feeling good, not me rushing through this." "Okay," Owen breathed, and Elijah could see him trembling slightly, nerves and anticipation warring in his expression. "Come here," Elijah said, settling on the couch and drawing Owen down beside him. They kissed for long minutes, Elijah keeping it slow and thorough, teaching Owen the rhythm of it, the give and take. His hands stayed carefully neutral, one on Owen's face, one on his shoulder, letting the kid get used to being touched without overwhelming him. But Owen had other ideas. His hands started exploring, sliding under Elijah's shirt to map the planes of his chest, his breath catching when he felt the definition there. "You're so strong," Owen murmured against Elijah's mouth. "I've watched you work for weeks, watched your muscles move, and I've wanted to touch you so badly." "Touch me then," Elijah encouraged, and Owen did, his hands learning Elijah's body with the same focused attention he brought to learning construction techniques. When his fingers found sensitive spots that made Elijah's breath hitch, Owen made a small, satisfied sound and filed the information away, clearly planning to use it later. "Your turn," Elijah said, his hands sliding to the hem of Owen's shirt. "Can I?" Owen nodded, raising his arm so Elijah could pull the fabric over his head. Underneath, Owen was lean and pale, his body showing the early signs of the physical work he'd been doing, muscles starting to define in his arms and shoulders. Elijah let his hands trace over that skin, feeling Owen shiver under his touch, watching goosebumps rise in the wake of his fingers. "Beautiful," Elijah murmured, and Owen's flush spread from his face down his chest. "You're so beautiful, Owen. Do you have any idea what you do to me?" "Show me," Owen said, his voice breaking slightly. "Please, Elijah, show me." Elijah shifted them so Owen was lying back against the couch cushions. Elijah braced above him and began a thorough exploration of every inch of skin he'd uncovered. He kissed Owen's neck, finding the spot that made him gasp and arch. He traced the line of his collarbone with his tongue, felt Owen's hands tighten in his hair. He worked his way down Owen's chest, learning what made him whimper, what made him moan. When his mouth found the sensitive peak on Owen's chest, the kid cried out and arched up into the contact, clearly unprepared for how good it would feel. Elijah worked him there until Owen was trembling and breathless, then moved to give equal attention to the other side, building Owen's pleasure slowly and deliberately. "Elijah, please," Owen gasped, his hips moving restlessly. I don't know what I need, but please." "I've got you," Elijah promised, his hand moving to the button of Owen's work pants. "Can I?" "Yes. God, yes." Elijah undid the button, lowered the zipper, and slid his hand inside. Owen was hard and aching, the evidence of his desire unmistakable, and when Elijah wrapped his hand around him, Owen's whole body went rigid with pleasure. "Oh God," Owen moaned, his head falling back. "That feels, oh God." Elijah worked him slowly, watching every reaction play across Owen's face, adjusting his grip and rhythm based on what made Owen gasp and shake. "You're so responsive," Elijah murmured. "So perfect. Let yourself feel it, Owen. Don't hold back." It didn't take long. Owen was too worked up, too inexperienced to last when someone else was touching him this way for the first time. Within minutes, he was trembling on the edge, his breath coming in desperate gasps, hands clutching at Elijah's shoulders like he needed something to hold on to. "Let go," Elijah encouraged. "I want to watch you come apart." Owen shattered with a cry that was nearly Elijah's name, his body arching as pleasure crashed through him in waves that left him shaking and gasping. Elijah worked him through it, gentling his touch as Owen came down, pressing soft kisses to his face and neck while he recovered. When Owen finally opened his eyes, they were bright with unshed tears and wonder. "That was," he started, then just shook his head, apparently beyond words. "Just wait," Elijah said with a smile. That was just the beginning. They moved to Elijah's bedroom after Owen recovered, stripping off the rest of their clothes with increasing urgency. Elijah took his time preparing Owen, using fingers and patience and constant reassurance, making absolutely sure the kid was ready before they went any further. "You're doing so good," Elijah praised as Owen adjusted to the stretch, his body slowly relaxing around Elijah's fingers. "So perfect, Owen. You're going to feel incredible." "I'm ready," Owen gasped after long minutes of careful preparation. "Please, Elijah. I need you inside me. I need to know what it feels like." Elijah positioned himself carefully, one hand braced beside Owen's head, the other guiding himself to Owen's entrance. "Look at me," he commanded softly, and Owen's eyes locked on his as Elijah began to push inside. The stretch was intense, Owen's body resisting at first despite the preparation, and Elijah watched carefully for any sign of real pain or distress. Owen's face was a study. In concentration, his hands gripping Elijah's shoulders, breath coming fast and shallow. "Breathe," Elijah instructed. "Just breathe through it. I've got you." Owen took a shaky breath and consciously relaxed, and Elijah felt him open up. Felt the moment his body accepted the intrusion and allowed Elijah deeper. Inch by careful inch, Elijah worked his way inside, pausing whenever Owen tensed, murmuring constant reassurance and praise. When he was finally fully seated, both of them were breathing hard, overwhelmed by the intensity of being joined this completely. Owen's eyes were wide and shocked, his body stretched impossibly around Elijah's substantial length. "You okay?" Elijah asked, holding perfectly still despite the overwhelming urge to move. Owen took a moment to answer, clearly processing the sensation. "It's so much," he finally managed. "You're so big, Elijah. I feel so full. Good full or bad full?" Owen shifted his hips experimentally and gasped at the sensation. "Good," he decided. "Really good. Will you move? Please?" Elijah started slowly, pulling back just a fraction and pushing back in, watching Owen's face for every reaction. The kid's eyes went wide, his mouth falling open in a silent "oh," as Elijah established a gentle rhythm, showing Owen what it felt like to be taken, claimed, filled completely. As Owen's body adjusted and relaxed further, Elijah gradually increased his pace, angling his hips to find that spot inside that would make Owen see stars. When he found it, Owen cried out and arched off the bed, his hands scrabbling for purchase on Elijah's back. "There," Owen gasped. "Oh God, right there. Please don't stop." Elijah didn't stop, working that spot with precision, building Owen's pleasure higher and higher. Watched the kid come apart beneath him, lost in sensation he'd never experienced before, giving himself over to Elijah's control completely. "Touch yourself," Elijah commanded, his voice rough with his own building pleasure. "I want to feel you come around me." Owen's hand flew to where he was hard and aching again, and within seconds he was flying apart, his body clenching rhythmically around Elijah as he came with a cry that echoed through the room. The sensation of Owen's body tightening around him pushed Elijah over the edge, and he followed with a groan, burying himself deep as his own release overtook him. They collapsed together, breathing hard, skin slick with sweat. Elijah carefully withdrew and gathered Owen against his chest, feeling the kid shake slightly with aftershocks and emotion. "You okay?" Elijah asked softly, pressing a kiss to Owen's temple. Owen was quiet for a long moment, then said in a wondering voice, "I had no idea. All these years, I had no idea it could feel like that. That I could feel like that." Elijah tightened his arms around him. "You were perfect," he said. "So perfect, Owen." They lay tangled together as their breathing settled, and Elijah felt something shift in his chest, something that felt dangerously like falling. This wasn't just physical attraction anymore. This was the beginning of something real. Something that could matter in ways that would complicate both their lives beyond measure. "What happens now?" Owen asked quietly, his fingers tracing idle patterns on Elijah's chest. "We still have 7 weeks left on my internship. We still work together. This doesn't change that." "No," Elijah agreed. "It doesn't. During work hours, you're my intern and I'm your supervisor. We maintain professional boundaries. But after hours, if you want this to continue, then we figure out how to make it work." "I want it to continue," Owen said immediately. "I want you, Elijah, not just tonight, but for as long as you'll have me." The confession was too much too soon, but Elijah found he couldn't reject it, couldn't tell Owen to slow down or be reasonable, because he felt it too, this pull towards something deeper than either of them was ready to name. "Then we figure it out," Elijah said simply. "Together." The next 7 weeks became a careful balancing act. During the day, they maintained strict professionalism, Elijah treating Owen exactly like any other crew member, Owen taking instruction without any hint of their after-hours intimacy. But the crew wasn't stupid, and people started noticing things. The way Elijah's eyes tracked Owen across the site, the way Owen lit up when Elijah praised his work, the new confidence in Owen's posture, the way he'd started smiling more, laughing with the guys instead of staying carefully apart. Jerome cornered Elijah during week 5, pulling him aside during lunch break. "So," he said, without preamble, "you sleeping with the intern?" Elijah could have denied it, but Jerome knew him too well. "After hours only," Elijah said. "During work, it's strictly professional." Jerome studied him for a long moment. "You fallen for him?" Elijah wanted to deny that too, but couldn't. "Yeah," he admitted, "I am." "That's going to complicate things," Jerome observed. "When the internship ends and he goes back to Columbia, what happens then?" "I don't know," Elijah said honestly. "We're figuring it out as we go. Just be careful," Jerome warned. "I've seen you build yourself up from nothing, and I'd hate to see you get hurt because some college kid was experimenting and decided he's ready to move on. The words stung because they voiced Elijah's own fears, the worry he carried every time Owen looked at him like he hung the moon. That eventually Owen would realize he could do better than a construction foreman with a high school education and hands permanently stained with honest labor. That this was just a phase, something exciting and forbidden that would lose its appeal once Owen returned to his real life. But those fears seemed unfounded as the weeks progressed and Owen showed no signs of losing interest. If anything, he became more attached, seeking Elijah out constantly, texting during hours they were apart, talking about future projects he wanted to work on, mentioning Elijah in those plans like it was a given he'd be there. They fell into a pattern of Owen staying at Elijah's place most nights. The kids' apartment apparently shared with roommates who made privacy impossible. Elijah's modest one-bedroom became their sanctuary, the place where they could be themselves without worrying about who was watching. Owen proved to be insatiable, eager to explore everything physical intimacy offered, learning Elijah's body with the same focused intensity he brought to learning construction. And Elijah discovered he loved teaching Owen, loved being the one to show him what pleasure could be, loved the trust Owen placed in him to make everything good and safe. But it wasn't just physical. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Owen confessed he'd known he was attracted to men since high school, but had never acted on it, too afraid of his parents' reaction, too focused on academic success to risk the complication. Elijah shared his own coming-out story, the years of hiding, the relief of finally living honestly, even if it meant losing some people he'd cared about. "You're brave," Owen said one night, curled against Elijah's chest. "You built a life that's completely yours, on your own terms. That takes real courage." "So are you," Elijah countered, "walking away from what your parents wanted, choosing architecture over finance, taking this internship even though you knew you'd be out of your depth. That's brave too." Owen was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I was brave because I met you. You make me want to be braver." The internship was entering its final week when everything came crashing down. They'd been so careful, maintaining their professional facade during work hours, never touching in public, never giving anyone ammunition. But careful wasn't the same as invisible, and eventually someone noticed the wrong thing at the wrong time. It was Marcus who saw them. They'd been working late, everyone else gone for the night, and Elijah had let his guard down, had pulled Owen close for a quick kiss before they left the site. They hadn't heard Marcus return for the tools he'd forgotten, hadn't realized they had an audience until Marcus cleared his throat and they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. The silence was excruciating. Marcus looked between them, his expression unreadable, and Elijah felt his career flash before his eyes. Marcus was a good man, but he was also traditional, and Elijah had no idea how he'd react to discovering his foreman was sleeping with the intern. "How long?" Marcus finally asked. "Since week 3, Elijah admitted. "After hours only. It's never affected work." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then surprised them both by smiling slightly. "Explains why college here's been so much happier. Kid was walking around the first few weeks like someone kicked his dog. Now he can't stop grinning." "You're not upset?" Owen asked, clearly shocked. Marcus shrugged. "Two consenting adults doing what they want on their own time. Not my business. Would have preferred not to know about it, honestly, but I'm not going to rat you out to corporate. Just be more careful. Not everyone's going to be as cool about it as me." "Thank you," Elijah said, meaning it. "That means a lot, Marcus. Just keep it professional on site," Marcus said. "And college, take care of him. Elijah's a good man. Don't break his heart." "I won't," Owen promised quietly. "He means everything to me." After Marcus left, Owen turned to Elijah with worried eyes. "Do you think he'll tell anyone?" Elijah considered, then shook his head. "Marcus is solid. If he says he'll keep it quiet, he will. But he's right that we need to be more careful. We got lucky this time. The close call should have scared them into being more cautious, but instead, it had the opposite effect. Knowing someone knew about them and wasn't condemning it made the secrecy feel less necessary, less suffocating. They started being slightly less careful, standing a bit closer during breaks, exchanging small smiles that anyone paying attention could read. And people were paying attention. By the start of week 10, the final week of Owen's internship, at least half the crew suspected something, even if they didn't know the details. The jokes changed, becoming less about Owen being a pretty boy who couldn't hack construction, and more about him being Elijah's shadow, always nearby, always watching. Owen didn't seem to care what people thought. His internship was ending, he'd gotten the credits he needed, and he'd proven himself capable on a real job site. More importantly, he'd found something he hadn't expected, someone who made him feel alive in ways architecture school never had. On Owen's last official day, the crew threw him an informal going-away gathering, beers shared after hours on the site they'd spent 10 weeks transforming. Owen had become one of them, earning respect through hard work and genuine humility, and they sent him off with the kind of affectionate roasting that meant he'd made the cut. Elijah hung back, watching Owen laugh and joke with Marcus and Jerome and the others, seeing how much the kid had grown in 10 weeks. He'd arrived soft and uncertain and left with calluses on his hands and confidence in his stance, transformed by the physical labor and the sense of accomplishment that came from building something real. When the party wound down and everyone started heading out, Owen caught Elijah's eye and hung back. They were the last two on site, just like they'd been that first night when everything changed. "So," Owen said, leaning against Elijah's truck, "what happens now? My internship's over. We don't work together anymore." "No," Elijah agreed. "We don't, which means we can stop hiding." Owen smiled, slow and warm. "Does that mean you're asking me to be your boyfriend officially? Because I'm saying yes." Elijah pulled him close, not caring if anyone saw, and kissed him thoroughly. "Yeah," he said when they broke apart. "I'm asking. And I'm also asking if you want to move in. Your lease is up next month anyway, and you spend most nights at my place already." Owen's eyes went wide. "You want me to move in with you?" "I want you in my life," Elijah said simply. "However that looks. If moving in is too fast, we can wait. But Owen, I'm not interested in casual anymore. I'm in this. I'm falling in love with you, and I need you to know that." Owen threw his arms around Elijah's neck and kissed him hard. "I'm already in love with you," he said against Elijah's mouth. "Have been for weeks. Yes, I'll move in. Yes to everything, Elijah." They stood there in the summer night, holding each other on the site where they'd met, where Owen had learned to build things with his hands, and Elijah had learned to let someone past his carefully constructed walls. The next months brought changes neither of them expected. Owen finished his final year at Columbia while working part-time for a small architecture firm, applying everything he'd learned during his internship. But he kept coming back to the construction site on weekends, kept putting on work clothes and getting his hands dirty alongside Elijah's crew, unable to stay away from the work that had changed him. Elijah encouraged it, loved seeing Owen in his element, watching him grow more confident and capable with every project. And when Owen graduated with honors, his thesis on integrating practical construction knowledge into architectural design earning praise from professors who usually dismissed anything that wasn't purely theoretical, Elijah felt pride swell in his chest like he'd built the thing himself. Owen got job offers from prestigious firms, companies that would have had him designing glass towers and winning awards. But instead, he asked Elijah a question that changed both their futures. What if we started our own company? Owen proposed one night, the two of them tangled together in bed after making love. Design and build, all in one. I create the plans, you execute them. We could do smaller projects, residential stuff, things that actually matter to people's lives instead of just corporate showcases. Elijah considered the idea, saw the potential in combining Owen's formal education with his practical experience. It's risky, he said, starting a business from nothing. It could fail. Or it could be amazing, Owen countered. We'd be building something together, Elijah. Something that's ours. They called it Cross Matthews Design Build and launched it with one small renovation project that Owen's mother commissioned more out of pity than confidence. But they delivered something beautiful, a complete transformation that came in under budget and ahead of schedule, and word spread. Within a year, they had more work than they could handle, a growing reputation for quality craftsmanship combined with innovative design. They hired selectively, building a crew that shared their vision of creating structures that served people rather than just impressing other architects. Marcus came on as their lead carpenter. Jerome joined as project manager. They found talented people who wanted to do meaningful work and treated them with respect and fair wages. The business grew steadily, and so did their relationship. They bought a house together, a fixer-upper that they renovated room by room, Elijah teaching Owen the fine details of the work, while Owen pushed him to think about design elements he'd never considered. It became a collaboration in the truest sense, each of them bringing their strengths to create something neither could have built alone. Owen's parents eventually came around, won over by seeing how happy their son was, how successful the company had become, how clearly Elijah loved and supported him. Elijah's mother, who'd worried he'd be alone forever, welcomed Owen into the family with open arms and constant invitations to Sunday dinner. 5 years after that first day on the Riverside construction site, Elijah proposed, not with flowers or fancy restaurants, but on a job site they were building together, surrounded by the materials and tools that had brought them together, in front of the crew that had become their extended family. Owen said yes through happy tears and kissed Elijah while everyone cheered. No more hiding, no more careful distance, just two men who'd found each other against all odds and built a life together, one brick, one beam, one choice at a time. They married the following spring in a ceremony that perfectly captured who they were. The venue was a building they'd renovated together, surrounded by friends and family, and the crew who'd watched their relationship develop from those first tentative weeks. Owen wore a perfectly tailored suit, but Elijah could still see the calluses on his hands from the work they'd done together that week. Elijah wore his best clothes, but everyone knew he'd probably be in work boots and a tool belt the next morning. In his vows, Owen talked about being taught to build things with his hands, about learning that strength came in many forms, about finding courage he didn't know he had. In his vows, Elijah talked about walls coming down, about learning to trust, about discovering that letting someone in wasn't weakness, but the bravest thing he'd ever done. "You came into my life looking lost," Elijah said, his voice thick with emotion. "And somehow you found me. You saw past everything I used to hide behind, and decided I was worth knowing. You taught me that love doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger, and I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the trust you placed in me that first day when you looked at me and decided I was someone worth following." "You taught me everything," Owen responded, tears streaming down his face. "You taught me how to use my hands, how to build something real, how to be brave enough to want things I'd spent years denying myself. You taught me that sometimes the best thing you can do is take a risk on something that scares you, because that's where you find what you've been missing. I love you, Elijah Cross. I'm gonna love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that." They kissed as married men while everyone they cared about celebrated. And Elijah thought about that kid who'd stood at the construction gate 10 years ago, nervous and uncertain and desperately hoping to prove himself. That kid had built something after all, not just structures made of wood and steel, but a life, a love, a future neither of them could have imagined back then. 10 years after their wedding, Cross Matthews Design Build had become one of the most respected firms in the city, known for projects that balanced beautiful design with practical construction, for treating workers fairly, for creating spaces that served communities rather than just enriching developers. They'd expanded beyond residential work into community projects, building schools and community centers and affordable housing, using their success to give back to neighborhoods like the one Elijah had grown up in. Owen's architectural vision, combined with Elijah's understanding of what working people actually needed, created something powerful, something that mattered. And through it all, they'd stayed solid, weathering the challenges every business and relationship faces, growing stronger through each difficulty because they'd built their foundation on honesty and trust and the willingness to work through problems together. They still work together most days, though they'd hired enough people that they could take time off without everything falling apart. Owen still got excited about new projects, still wanted Elijah's input on every design. Elijah still loved watching Owen work, seeing him animated and passionate about creating something beautiful. And sometimes, on late nights when they were the last ones on a site, Elijah would pull Owen close and kiss him, remembering how it all started, how one moment of reckless courage from a kid who didn't know what he was doing had changed everything. "You know what I was thinking today?" Owen said one evening as they stood together watching the sunset from the roof of their latest project, a community center in the Bronx that would serve hundreds of families. "I was thinking about that first day, when I showed up terrified and completely out of my depth, and you were so intimidating I could barely speak." "You hit it well," Elijah said, pulling Owen against his side. "I thought you were just another entitled kid who'd wash out in a week." Owen laughed. "I almost did wash out. I almost quit a dozen times that first week. The only thing that kept me coming back was you. The way you looked at me, like maybe I could be more than I thought I was capable of." "You were always capable of more," Elijah said. "You just needed someone to believe in you until you could believe in yourself." "You gave me that," Owen said softly. "You gave me everything, Elijah. A career I love, a life that matters, a love I never thought I'd find. All because you were brave enough to kiss me back that night. Best decision I ever made," Elijah said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "Kissing you, loving you, building this life with you, all of it." They stood together as the sun set over the city, two men who'd started in completely different worlds and found their way to each other through physical labor and emotional courage and the willingness to risk everything for something real. From nervous intern to confident architect, from isolated foreman to business partner and husband, they'd both been transformed by what they'd built together. Not just the physical structures that bore their company's name, but the relationship they'd constructed one choice at a time, one moment of trust at a time, one day of choosing each other at a time. And they would continue building together for the rest of their lives, creating something that would outlast them both, something beautiful and strong and absolutely real. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from, because love in all its forms deserves to be celebrated. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can build isn't made of steel and stone, it's made of courage and trust, and two people deciding that what they have together is worth fighting for. Share this with someone who needs to hear that taking a risk on love is always worth it, that being brave enough to want what you want can change your entire life, and that sometimes the person who teaches you the most is the one you least expect.